Tasmania is the full stop at the bottom of the world, and we live on an island of stories. For years now, the Tamar Valley Writers Festival has celebrated our great thinkers, writers and readers, and now we're excited to share these insights globally. I'm Lyndon Rigol, and throughout this series, my colleague Annie Warburton and I will be talking to writers, playwrights, comedians, poets, editors, and all of those who share a love of the written word, right here on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast. Adam Thompson is a pakana writer from Launceston, awarded a First Nations Fellowship at Varuna Writers House, and one of 10 recipients of the inaugural Next Chapter initiative from the Wheeler Centre. His work spans prose, performance and television, and saw him named as Aboriginal Artist of the Year in 2019 at the Tasmanian NAIDOC Awards. Adam was runner-up in Overland's 2020 Neilma Sidney short story competition and has worked for nearly 2 decades at the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, where he's passionate about advancing the interests of the Aboriginal community. Born Into This is his first short story collection. Born Into This is a powerful and timely collection of stories that pulls into sharp focus the challenges and triumphs of Aboriginal Tasmania, exploring everything from the political and the environmental to the social and heartbreakingly personal. It's a wake-up call, a call to arms, and a plea for action that moves beyond virtue signalling, commemorating generations of necessary resilience and resistance that have nevertheless taken their toll. Somehow, beyond all of these other ambitions, the collection is also by turns funny, sarcastic, compassionate and gut-wrenching, with Thompson's writing being justly celebrated by such Australian heavyweights as Melissa Lukashenko, Tony Birch, Ellen Van Meerven, Bob Brown and Tara June Lynch. In today's episode of the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast, I talk to Adam about short stories, life as an advocate, and the power of fiction to challenge and inspire. Adam Thompson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, as with all good stories, I'd like to start at the beginning, and I'd love to know, where does this storytelling gene of yours come from? Where is the writer Adam Thompson born?
Oh, well, I was born in Western Australia, actually, and my parents are both from Tassie. My mum went over to WA when she was young, met my father who was from Hobart. They had me and then they separated and they came back. Well, my mum came back to Launceston when I was a couple of months old, and I've lived here ever since.
And what about writing? Where does your love of writing come from?
Well, I've always been a reader, and I love, hearing a good yarn. I like telling a story, and I'm 43, and I only really started kind of writing fiction in about 2016. So I came into it kind of older, and I always wanted to write. And I guess I just had built up enough life experience and stories in my head to put them down on paper. So yeah, and I guess living in a fantastic place, Tasmania, having a great culture behind me, being a Tasmanian Aboriginal person, there's so much to write about. So it just was kind of inevitable that would happen. And
so these stories were stewing away. What was it that was the moment when you knew that you could commit them to paper?
Well, I kind of felt a bit left behind, because other people in my life who I was always talking about story to and, coming up with yarns, they started to get their stories down and out into the world through different means. And like I said, I felt left behind, so I was inspired by that feeling. And I just started writing. And then it just so happened that the Tamar Valley Writers Festival had a competition, and I thought, oh, well, here's a good opportunity to get something down on paper. And one of the stories that I'd written and submitted to this comp, I did okay, and there was a bit of prize money, and I was just kept going from there.
One of the things I'm really interested in that you're doing here, and I've heard you do before, is that you often draw a little bit of a distinction between writer and storyteller. Do you see those as two clearly distinct things, and is there a crossover between the two? How does that work?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I started, with no background in creative writing at all. And so I came into, this kind of writing game as a storyteller. I had the stories, I kind of knew how to tell them verbally, but I had a crack at writing, and then I guess as I've continued writing, then I've picked up the craft and I guess at some point you can call yourself a writer, even though you always feel like an imposter. I guess now I can call myself a writer. So I think there is a bit of a distinction there, and at some point they kind of meld together.
And do you feel comfortable now calling yourself a writer, or does that fear of being an imposter still worry you now that Born Into This is in the world, and now that you're out there and being recognised?
Well, yeah, there's a book out there, and I guess I can safely call myself a writer or an author. I don't really identify with that. I do in the right space if I'm around other writers or something like this, but generally I'm just Adam Thompson, work at the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. I'm a dad and a husband, and that's really and an Aboriginal person, and that's how I identify, and writing is something that I do.
Can you tell us a bit more about your work with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, and because I know it's been a long-standing career for you, but also how that might have affected the way that you write and the way that you tell stories?
Absolutely, that affected, I guess, what I write about. I've worked at the TAC now for close to 20 years. I started, at the bottom, washing cars and, cleaning up offices. And then I got the opportunity to do some work on the islands. So the islands off the northeast of Tassie and the Aboriginal-owned islands. And I started working mainly on Chapel Island and Badger Island. I was helping a builder, one of our community members. He was building a house and some accommodation for the land management workers. So I was working over there. Then I got into land management, and I was a ranger on the islands for years. And these are really special places. And I guess and if you've read Born Into This, you'll see there's quite a few of the stories and scenarios that are set on the islands. They're just these amazing places that you go to. They're kind of inaccessible, and most people would never be able to get there. And I guess I kind of like the idea of being able to take those amazing places with such a rich history and heritage and then kind of deliver them to the world, because most people, like I said, would never be able to get there. So that's been really good. And then so many other opportunities I've had through the TAC, working in campaigns, the Change the Date stuff. As you'll see, there's 2 stories in this book that relate to the Invasion Day a campaign, the Change the Date campaign. So things that I feel passionate about are in there. And so the TAC's had a big influence on my politics and my ability to get around to these places and work and get amongst it. So, and so I worked as a ranger, and then I left for a couple of years, and I've been back there for another 10 years now. And, I do all different stuff now. I'm working in preserving community history. So I do oral history with elders and community people, collect old photos, still work in campaigns and do all different stuff, a lot of admin things now. But look, it's a great place to work. I'm very proud to work at the TAC. I kind of feel like I'm walking in the footsteps of my community and all the people who, back in the 70s, marching down Charles Street here, for recognition for land rights, and now we've come a long way. In some ways, we've kind of gone backwards a little bit too politically, but we've come a long way, and look, it's been an amazing experience working for the TAC, and it has influenced my writing a lot.
And how do you balance all of these parts of yourself? So you've got obviously a really important family life. You've got your work with the TAC, and you've got writing. I wonder if I can ask you a little bit about where everything fits in.
Yeah, look, it's just, I'd like to be able to say that it's very organised and, I've got all this set time scheduled for this and that, but it's nothing like that at all. I've got to put my day job first, because, that's, it's important that I'm there working amongst the community, and, but, and then there's family life as well. That's equally as important, if not more important. And the writing, I kind of have to just fit in. And I'm not the sort of writer, and other writers that are watching this kind of probably interested in hearing about my process, because I love hearing about other people's process. But I'm not the sort of person at the moment that can just, if you've got a quick half an hour, that you can just get a bit of writing, and I kind of have to be in the right zone. Not psych myself up so much, but I just have to have a little bit of time set aside, and I've got to be in the right headspace. I can't be stressed out. So finding the time when I'm in that headspace is kind of hard. And then, so when I'm there, I just have a go at writing, and I kind of resent writing on the weekends. So usually it's early in the morning or after work.
And does it ever take you by surprise? Is there ever a moment where suddenly, you know, through your experiences, the story idea will strike you and you kind of desperately want to hide, or do ideas come at the time when you dedicate that time?
No, look, ideas are always coming, and even when I'm not writing, I'm always thinking about story. Like, you know, I'm writing a novel at the moment, but I've spent so long just planning that in my head and thinking about the characters and the situations, and there's always stuff coming to me constantly. So it's, you know, sometimes I make little notes on my phone or in my notepad, or sometimes I'm just remembering it. So, you know, a lot of that writing process is just thinking about the story.
So I'd like to come back to, because I'm really interested in the differences between short stories, and one of the things I wanted to ask you was whether you were interested in moving into novel writing. So I do want to talk about that more. But before we move on, in talking about moving from storytelling to writing, you talked about the craft of writing and that was a key part of your training. How did you learn that craft, and I guess more importantly, what influences in terms of literary figures helped you on that journey?
Okay. So I got a grant through Arts Tasmania for a mentorship. After I wrote that story for the Tamar Valley Writers Festival competition, I thought, you know, I kind of need a little bit of help to do this. So I applied for a grant and I got one, and I discovered this wonderful author by the name of Kate Gordon from Hobart, from Nipaluna, which is Hobart. And so, you know, I met Kate and we kind of had an interview and we worked out that we'd like to work together. And then so throughout that year, I worked with her and I sent Kate, you know, my work and the stories, and she sent them back. And, you know, and she's really wholesome and professional, and I'm kind of out there, my work's kind of crazy. So she kind of tamed me a little bit, I suppose, and levelled me out. And she's been a really, you know, big influence on me, Kate. And I still work with Kate when I can. She's an amazing person and a good friend now. And so then I was successful with the Next Chapter scheme through the Wheeler Centre, which I never thought I'd get. It was pretty competitive, and I sent them 10,000 words of a manuscript, and, you know, I was successful. And through that process, I started working with Kate Kennedy, and she's another amazing person. And, you know, she was fantastic, and she taught me a lot about craft, because I guess by the time I had given her the stories to look at, they weren't refined, but they had a bit of a polish through me and Kate looking at them. And so really, you know, she kind of helped me with the stories that I was writing after that point within that year of the Next Chapter scheme on the craft. So I really learned, through the Kates. Kate Kennedy and Kate Gordon.
And with your two Kates, what sort of things did you find were missing or that needed changing or updating?
Well, I guess the benefit of working with those mentors wasn't just about learning craft and that kind of thing. You know, they were really helpful in making me confident that my voice was kind of unique and wanted. I compared myself to other writers, and everyone's better than I am. But they made me feel, I guess, confident enough to get my work out there, because, you know, they said, especially Kate Gordon, you know, said to me, the world doesn't want another Stephen King, you know. As fantastic as he is, but there's already a Stephen King in the world, and readers want a new voice. And so she's seen that from the start where I couldn't. So, you know, that confidence from them and that was really helpful. And I guess other things too, you know, Kate Kennedy taught me a lot about keeping the reader immersed in the story and not giving them anything to break them out of it. So that was really helpful. Can't really remember all the other details.
So when you're putting a story together, I'm really intrigued by the fact that now you're working with a longer form of fiction. So I'd love to know how that might have changed your writing process. But how do you know whether something is a short story or a novel when you started. Is this an evolution for you, or are some things always going to be short form in your writing?
Yeah, look, I'll always write short stories. I guess with a short story, I see, a snapshot in time that I want to capture. Just a scenario or a short period of time. And I really like that. I'll always write, short stories, short fiction. But I like the idea of long form. I like the idea of giving the characters a bit more life and to develop them further. With a short form, as you know, you only have a small period of time, and it is important to develop the character as much as you can. And I think I've done it reasonably well with this book. At least some of the feedback has kind of shown that. But look, I'm really looking forward to getting into the long form and really kind of testing myself and seeing where I can go with the characters. And I guess, look, I've got a very different story in mind for the novel that I'm writing now compared to the short stories.
And so how has progress been with the novel? How have you found that experience?
Well, I basically started writing it, did a reasonable amount, and now I've completely changed my idea. I felt, actually, to be honest, I was writing a novel that I felt other people wanted. And when I started writing, and with all the stories born into this, I'm writing what I like to read. And I felt with the novel that I'd started, I was writing a story I felt other people wanted from me. So I kind of completely changed it up, and now I'm telling the story that I want to tell. And to be honest, I don't care if other people don't like it. If I write something that I think's great, well, I've kind of won, and hopefully other people will like it, I guess, especially when you're spending all that time on it. Yeah.
I wonder, this book took quite some time. This is years of writing for you, isn't it, to put together Born Into This? How long did it take from the first story to the final story?
Well, I wrote the first story, which is Honey, in 2016. And then I had it pretty much finalised by 2019, so it's probably around 3 years. Okay,
so that's not too long. Do you think you changed at all as a writer over the course of writing the different stories?
Absolutely. I like I said, I learnt a lot more, and what I did learn along the journey, I was at least able to go back to some of those earlier stories and tweak them a little bit, and where I felt that I was a bit amateur in some of those early ones. But I have other work that's not in this book too.
How did you decide which ones made the cut? Were they just the ones that you felt were weaker, or did you have sort of themes and a sense of unity that you were looking for?
Yeah, I guess some of that decision was made by the publisher as well. There's some of the work, not so much that it didn't make the cut, that it didn't really gel with the other stories, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so these stories are all kind of, I think they work well together. Yeah.
Do you have a favourite?
Well, I don't know. It changes. When I flick back through it, and I'm like, I like that bit, or I like that story. The title story, Born Into This, I think is a fitting title story, and I think the title sums up the book quite well. But there's a story towards the end of the book called Time and Tide, and I think that Born Into This and Time and Tide would be my favourites. Time and Tide's one of the last stories in there I wrote. It's pretty spare in the writing style, and I'm really proud of that story. And I thought that would be quite a popular story with the readers, and out of all of the feedback that I've got back, there's very few have mentioned that one. So I find that interesting. And some of the ones that I like, but I wouldn't put them on top of my list, seem to be the ones that are the most popular with everyone else. So,
where does a story start for you? Does it start with a character? Does it start with, because I'm so intrigued by the diversity of location and environment, the diversity of ideas in this collection, that I almost find myself wondering what your first thing is that you grab onto when you're designing a story.
That changes. Often it's, a what if scenarios. I just see something, I'm like, well, what if that happened and I could combine this thing here, you know? Like it's a hard question to answer, Lyndon, because I guess the inspiration and the spark of those stories has all come from different things. Yeah, that's kind of hard to say. It's just varied, yeah. But usually it's when I see something or I'm talking to somebody and then I get this kind of light bulb moment, you know, and I just go, okay, that's something I'll keep.
At the risk of giving you another really difficult question, one of the other things I really love is that I feel like you often end with quite a punch, and your stories stay with the reader. Do you sometimes think really carefully about where to end? Have you done a lot of cutting in order to get those kind of gut punch moments, or do you just let it flow where it needs to go?
No, look, that's all very deliberate. Not all of the endings in the book are the original endings. Your ending is that last, as you know, it's that last bit of the story that you read, and that's the bit that stays with you. So, you know, look, over those years that I've kind of working on this on and off, yeah, some of the endings change. But I mean, it's very deliberate. You know, like I said, I write what I like to read, and I like to read a story that makes me feel something, and I like to read something that makes me think about it afterwards. I like an ending that's a little bit kind of ambiguous. I think I know how that went, but I'm not quite sure. I find that stays with you. And I feel that, you know, if you can make someone feel something and have them thinking about the story after you've kind of won. So that's what I've tried to achieve very purposefully with this book.
And I think I have to say very successfully as well. The Guardian has talked really glowingly about this book. And one of the things that they said that I found really fascinating was that they celebrated the suggestion that you are identifying in this book that there is no single version of Aboriginal Australia, and that you're looking at lots of different diverse perspectives on what it means to be an Aboriginal Australian, what it means to be an Aboriginal Tasmanian. Is that something that you set out to do across all of the stories? And is that important to you as an idea?
Yes and no. I mean, I've heard that comment from quite a few reviewers. I never had the impression that there was one type of Aboriginal person. Maybe that's from because I'm Aboriginal. I see so many different ways of thinking in our community. But yeah, absolutely. Look, I wanted to provide a variety of perspectives. Not all of the views of the characters in the book are mine. Absolutely not. I've tried to distance myself from this as much as I can. Obviously, there's things in there that I'm passionate about, like change the date and that kind of stuff, and that's in there. But the views of the characters aren't necessarily mine. So yeah, I wanted to have a range of views. I wanted to have a range of perspectives, and that's as in perspectives too, as in like, you know, third person, second person, and that kind of thing. I wanted it. I didn't want it to be a collection that's from the same perspective all the way through, because I find that gets a little bit boring, and I really wanted to change it up and keep the reader kind of, you know, wanting more and enjoying that diversity.
One of the challenges with that diversity, I imagine, is that there's a lot of thought experiment going on in these stories, and there's a lot of playfulness, but there's also quite a bit of pain. Were there moments when it was really hard to write, and were there moments when you wanted to stop and pushed yourself to keep going because you felt it was an important message, or did you sort of just glide over that pain because of the necessity of telling those stories that you wanted to tell? Yeah,
look, I didn't really have so much of an issue. Probably the person who did was my mentor, Kate Gordon, because, you know, she, as a non-Aboriginal person, was kind of confronted by the stuff in the book, whereas I could tell it easily, some of those hard messages, that gut punch kind of stuff that you mentioned. And whereas she kind of was treading around it, I'm kind of happy to hit that head on. So I didn't find it difficult to do that. That was probably the part that I enjoyed the most.
So I want to talk about some of the celebratory comments on this book. Melissa Lukashenko said that it was tough yet tender and compelling. Ellen van Neerven said that your story struck like lightning. Bob Brown said that your stories are as beautifully written as they are evocative. Now that this is out in the world, now that people are responding to it, how have these kind of comments made you feel and changed your understanding of yourself as someone making this transition from storyteller to writer?
Look, it's very flattering and of course lovely to hear good stuff about you and what you're writing, and that was something that I was hoping for, of course, as all authors do. You want your work to get read as much as you can and appreciated by people. I kind of find it hard to, when someone says something about you like that, it's kind of hard to absorb. You kind of think, I wonder if they're just saying that. But I know, like some of the, like what Melissa said, tough yet tender, I can see that, like it is tough at times and my voice can be like that. But then, part of that making people feel something, you have to go into that tender zone as well. And so, I think that they did a great job at doing those endorsements. Just not so much because they're really good endorsements, but because they obviously understood the work. And when they read it, they're very smart people, and I think they really they read it thoroughly and understood it, and I'm really grateful for that. Yeah.
You spoke about some of the reactions to individual stories surprising you, some of the stories that people are talking about that you possibly in your own head thought might have not been the strongest, and some that are really heartfelt, passionate for you, but that other people haven't responded to necessarily as strongly. Overall, to the collection, have some of the responses surprised you a little bit?
The most that I've been surprised about, to be honest, is that I haven't seen a lot of hate. And I thought that I would. I mean, some of the things that I've said in there are a bit confronting, especially to non-Aboriginal people. Some of the stuff, there's some flag burning in there, and some very patriotic people I assumed would kind of get their back up against that sort of stuff. Perhaps they just haven't read it yet. So, I was surprised I haven't come across any negative comments. But yeah, look, the rest of it, I've just been really grateful. It's all been very positive.
And the Tasmanianness of this book, the Tasmanian landscape in this book is so important. And one of the things that I loved was that Launceston is so significant in this book, and the north of the state, and the islands, as you've talked about. What do you think is different about being a Tasmanian writer telling these stories versus a writer from other states in Australia?
Well, we've got a very unique place here. I like the idea of, especially for Tasmanian people, that you can pick up a book and read it and know the places. There's a story in there, Honey, and a lot of people have commented to me, when I read that, I know the St Mary's Pass or the Elephant Pass. I just could imagine all of that. So I like the idea of being able to give that as a gift to the people of Tasmania. As I guess other writers, from here who write about this place would probably feel the same. And people in my community as well, that they're able to pick up this stuff and read about things that they know, that they're not really reading elsewhere, especially in fiction. But Tasmania is such a fantastic landscape to include in your work. This is like Launceston's my hometown. I love just writing about my hometown. I feel that as a writer, you can write about whatever you like. Why would I set it anywhere else? This is such a great place. It's not as written about as other places too. And it was just a natural thing to write about here. And the islands, like I said earlier, this is very, very unique places, very remote, hard to get to. And most people will never get there. And when you go there and then leave again, like I have, you're kind of coming and going from the islands. It's funny, these places are always with you in your mind. You're always wondering what's happening over there now, because there's not always people there. And when you're there, like in that story, Jack's Island, the guy who goes to live there, he's he becomes in tune with the island, and he's, anything that's different, any new people that come there, he's kind of really picks up on. And it's like that. These are amazing places, and I like to express myself creatively around those islands, around Launceston, and it's just been a pleasure to do.
How often do you get to the island?
Well, I go mutton birding over there. I'm about to go at the end of next week. These days, because I don't work over there all the time, it's really just a couple of times a year. It depends what's happening, really. But I used to go there all the time doing the ranger stuff, and I used to live over there for, I was there most of the time. I'd go over there for a couple of months and come off for a week or something.
Is it a place that you write?
Do I write there?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote the story in there, The Black Eye. I wrote that during mutton birding. Must have been around 2017. And while I've been over there, I've been working on a few things, but I haven't gone over there for like a writer's retreat or something. I mean, I'd love to, but it just hasn't happened, especially now I've got a child, and it's kind of harder to get away.
So just to finish, we've talked about the enduring nature of these stories, and we've talked about your intention that they do stay with you, that they do hit you with a gut punch and leave something with you to think about. When someone has finished Born Into This and they're about to head back out into their lives, what would you like them to do as the first thing that they do after they finish this collection?
I'd like them to support the Change the Date campaign. Look, I guess, I like that people are talking about the work. Some of the comments that I've had, a lot of the comments that this is an important piece of work because, there's not much like this. And people are talking about wanting to have it in schools and stuff like that. So I guess I'd like people to spread the word, about it, and they can always make comments and stuff on social media about it. I mean, I certainly appreciate all of that publicity. But I just like people to kind of absorb it. The messages in there, I'd like them to kind of think about, and I hope that it kind of has an effect on people and they become more supportive to Aboriginal issues. I think that would be a good win for me and my community if that was an outcome of this book.
Well, Adam, it's a wonderful book. It's well worth talking about, and it's been a pleasure to talk about it with you. Thank you for joining us on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast.
Thanks very much, Lyndon.
The Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast series is sponsored by Events Tasmania, M Visuals, and the award-winning Turner Steelhouse Distillery at Grindelwald, home of Three Cuts Gin, the perfect accompaniment to a night of reading. For more information on any books mentioned in this program, please visit Petrarch's, Launceston's major bookshop and a wonderful supporter of the Tamar Valley Writers Festival.